Hey guys, we're ready for chapter 4. More wisdom bites the dust. Jimmy Jack Huxterly worked on me all the next morning. He worked on me as I walked to breakfast. He worked on me as I ate breakfast. He even worked on me as I headed to the bathroom. The guy just wouldn't let up. I spread the word, man. Everyone's waiting. Just say when. When what? I asked nervously, pushing up my glasses. When you want the big meeting. I had started to wear down. I could feel it. Maybe he was right. Maybe being the camp hero was my destiny. But something still didn't feel right. Later, we were all practicing at the archery range, if you can call hitting everything but the target practicing. I asked Opera and Wall Street what they thought. Opera had sort of managed to repair his Walkman. Sort of, meaning he only had one earpiece and the tape sounded like it was playing underwater. But with his kind of music, who could tell? The guy's bad news, Opera shouted. What about the gorilla? I asked. Somebody's got to stand up to Gary. Remember what Dale said, Wall Street reminded me, about choosing quality friends? So? So I don't think Jimmy Jack Huxterly exactly qualifies. I gave Wall Street a long look before grabbing another arrow. Maybe she was right. I pulled back my bow, took aim, and suddenly dropped my mouth open in shock. While we were talking, someone had tacked a huge crayon drawing of a gorilla on my target. And you didn't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out who was. But by lunch it finally happened. Jimmy Jack had finally worn me down. All right, already. We'll have your meeting, I sighed, but just one. It's only a meeting, I told Opera on the way back from the arts and crafts room. I figure 3, maybe 4 kids will show up tops. So why even go? He shouted over his music. So Jimmy Jack will leave me alone. Eventually, we arrived at the cabin and I opened the door. The place was packed. I've organized them in groups, Jimmy Jack beamed. The eggheads are here to the left. A half dozen brainy types nodded at me. The girls are over there. Nearly a dozen girls grinned and waved from the center of the room. Hi, Wally. The athletes are over here. Yo. And your dorkoids are right behind you. I turned to see Opera and Wall Street. They both kind of gave sheepish shrugs as if to say, oh well, why not? For a second, I got all shaky. I didn't know what to say or what to do, but that didn't seem to matter because by the look of things, Jimmy Jack did. These are your assignments, he said, passing out photocopied sheets, complete with diagrams, to each of the groups. Learn them, memorize them, make them your life. If we're to destroy the gorilla's cruel dictatorship, allowing the downtrodden to rise up in victory, then we must all do our share. Cruel dictatorship? Downtrodden rise up in victory? This guy had definitely been seeing too many movies. But when I looked around the cabin, everybody nodded as if they understood. And now a word from our leader. All eyes turned toward me. Everyone broke into applause. I broke out into a sweat. They clapped louder. I sweated harder. How'd I know what to say? This was all Jimmy Jack's doing, not mine. But you couldn't convince him of that. No, sir. These folks were definitely expecting a hero. Finally, they all settled down and waited for some awe-inspiring words of courage from me. I pushed my glasses back up my nose and smiled. They waited. I smiled harder. They waited longer. Oh well, I figured, here goes nothing. And I couldn't have been more right. I opened my mouth and tried to speak, but no words came out. My mouth was as dry as the Sahara Desert. Come to think of it, that was about how empty my brain was, too. I tried again. Still nothing. There were a couple of uneasy coughs and a few nervous shufflings. I took a deep breath and tried one last time. Then suddenly, as luck would have it, my eyes landed on my t-shirt. The one stained with beans, cheese, and hot sauce. It was hanging above my bunk, drying out from my last run-in with Gary. And before I could stop it, the phrase, remember the burrito, leaped out of my mouth. Everyone stared in stunned silence. Jimmy Jack, too, but only for a second. Suddenly he began to clap. That's right, he shouted as he pretended to get excited. That's great, he cried. He kept right on clapping, and pretty soon others started to clap, too. They weren't exactly sure why, but since Jimmy Jack was so excited, they figured they better be. "Remember the burrito!" Jimmy Jack cried. He began repeating the phrase over and over again. "Remember the burrito! Remember the burrito!" Others joined in. "Remember the burrito! Remember the burrito!" Soon the entire cabin was chanting, "Remember the burrito! Remember the burrito!" Granted, it wasn't as good as "Remember the Alamo" or any of those other catchy war cries, but it was all I could do with such a short notice. "Remember the burrito! Remember the burrito! Remember the burrito!" Everyone kept shouting as they headed for the door, as they slapped me on the back, as they thanked me for being such a brilliant leader. "Remember the burrito?" Jimmy Jack whispered scornfully into my ear. "Give me a break, McDougal." But for everybody else, he pretended to smile. And for everybody else, I pretended to smile back. Still, there was no missing the heavy feeling down in my gut. But it wasn't from the lame slogan. It was something deeper. What had I done? What had I gotten myself into? All this as the crowd continued cheering and slapping me on the back. "Remember the burrito! Remember the burrito! Remember the burrito!" An hour later, we were all sitting on the bleachers. The afternoon sun felt good and warm on our backs. Dale was giving another one of his talks on wisdom. It was all about how it's wise to be kind to others. It wasn't a bad talk. I mean, on the McDougal scale of boredom, it was only about a 2.4. He went on about how we should all be nice to everybody, no matter who they were. We should be nice to everybody. I figured he was probably right, but I also figured everybody couldn't include Gary the gorilla. How could it? After all Gary had done? After all the preparations we'd made to get him? And let's not forget about my becoming the camp hero. Whatever else, let's not forget about that. At least that's what part of me was thinking. The other part was thinking about Dale's speech and what it might have to do with Gary. I figured I had two choices. Either listen to Dale and worry if I was doing the right thing, or study my assignment sheet from Jimmy Jack and prepare to clobber Gary. With a deep breath, I pulled Jimmy Jack's paper out of my pocket and began to study. I figure by now you're wondering what type of guy is writing this. I mean, don't I ever listen to the Bible and stuff? Actually, I do. A lot. I've been going to Sunday school from like first grade on. It's just that, I don't know, sometimes other things kind of get in the way and jumble stuff up. And this was definitely one of those times. I mean, I had a chance to be the star of the entire camp. Me, Wally McDougal, superhero. With that kind of opportunity staring you in the face, it's pretty hard to remember the little details. You know, like obeying God and stuff. I suppose when you get right down to it, that's probably the main reason I'm writing this. To let you know, so you don't go off and make the same mistake. Better make that mistakes. 6:00 p.m. dinner. The girls had followed Jimmy Jack's instructions to the letter. While the rest of us were out trying to drown ourselves in the lakes, the girls had volunteered to help the cook with dinner. What a sweet, innocent offer, right? Not exactly. By now, everyone knew the only stuff you could count on being able to eat at camp, other than the half-frozen burritos, were the desserts. That's because they were bought already made and frozen. You know, stuff like frozen pies, frozen cakes, that sort of thing. The reason was simple. There wasn't a whole lot of damage a cook could do to taking them from the freezer to your plate. Anyway, that's why the desserts were the only thing Gary and his goons stole from the other kids. It was like a ritual. If you were unlucky enough to pass Gary with your meal tray, you were unlucky enough to lose your dessert. Plain and simple. Tonight's dessert was pumpkin pie. "Oh, can we fix those pies up nice and pretty?" the girls asked. "How?" the cook said. "With whipped cream," the babes offered. "Cool idea," the cook replied. "Why don't you girls take care of that? You'll find the whipped cream in the refrigerator." But the girls didn't need the whipped cream in the refrigerator. They had some of their own. And it wasn't exactly whipped cream. It was more like shaving cream. Shaving cream purchased at the convenience store down the road. Later at dinner, Gary and his goons thought they were having a lucky day. For some reason, a lot more campers than normal seemed to be passing their table. This, of course, meant that the goons had a lot more dessert than normal. Not only that, but for some reason, the cook's helpers had been incredibly generous with the topping. For some reason, each pie was piled high with thick, rich creamy topping. The goons didn't suspect a thing. Oh, sure, the pies tasted a little weird, but hey, they came from the toxic waste site. What could you expect? It wasn't until Gary and the boys were on their fourth or fifth piece that they began to suspect something was up. Gary was the first to notice. It seemed no one else in the cafeteria was eating their dessert. It also seemed that there were a lot of sidelong glances and snickerings going on. But Gary's suspicions weren't confirmed until Goon 1 started hiccuping. Then Goon 2 started. Pretty soon, Gary also joined the chorus. It wasn't the hiccups that were the problem. It was the bubbles that followed each hiccup. Bubbles that floated mysteriously out of their mouths. It was also from the foam that started running out of the corners of those mouths. The campers could no longer help themselves. Suddenly, everyone broke out laughing. Suddenly, Gary turned beet red. And suddenly, he shouted my name at the top of his lungs. McDougal! But he didn't stick around to chat. He and his goons were too busy racing out of the cafeteria. They were too busy looking for the nearest water fountain so they could rinse and spit, something they'd probably been doing the rest of the night. Now that they were out of the room, all eyes turned to me, and once again, the applause started. I've got to admit, it felt pretty neat. No, actually it felt pretty terrific. Wonderful. Everything except the part where I caught Dale looking at me. I can't explain it exactly. It wasn't like he was mad or anything. It was more like he was just disappointed. Real disappointed. I swallowed hard and tried to smile. If he was disappointed over this, just wait till he saw what happened next. Jimmy Jack's plans had only begun. The little knot in my stomach returned. Only now it wasn't so little. Now it seemed to be taking up a whole lot more space down there. And that's the end of chapter 4. Chapter 5 is, oops. So until next time, guys, bye.